On October 1st of 2018, just hours before the movie started playing to audiences around the world, critics were allowed to share their first impressions of Venom, the highly anticipated Sony movie based on a Marvel character. These first impressions were mixed to negative, with many reviews mentioning it in the same breath as Halle Berry's Catwoman and Josh Trank's Fantastic Four. Others described it as a blast from the past, in that it seemingly ignored all the strides comic book movies have made over the last 15 years, and that instead it felt like a throwback to the days of Ben Affleck's Daredevil. How could Venom, a film that has spent the better part of 2 decades in development and one of the most anticipated movies of the year, become the latest example of the growing rift between critics, studios, and audiences? In this video, that will be explained. To do that, we will first briefly explore Venom's comic book origins, the previous attempts at making a Venom feature film, and Sony's first stab at making their own cinematic Sony Marvel universe. Then, we'll explore the making of this incarnation of the movie, its connection to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and how its eventual level of success very well could determine whether or not Spider-Man will be allowed to stay in the legitimate Marvel Cinematic Universe where he currently resides. The origin of Venom can be traced back to a small Illinois village in 1982. An avid comic reader named Randy Schueller from the town of Norwich submitted the idea of Spider-Man acquiring a new black-colored suit. Marvel Comics editor-in-chief Jim Shooter purchased the idea for $220. Artist John Byrne combined it with an idea of a suit made of a biological material, something he had pondered since working on Iron Fist. Finally, writer Tom DeFalco established the concept that the suit was a sentient alien creature. All of this would be combined to create the symbiote, which was first introduced to the world in May of 1984 for The Amazing Spider-Man issue 252, after Spidey's return from the original Secret War. Venom made his first fully fledged appearance in the landmark issue 300 by David Michelin and Todd McFarlane. Venom consisted of the alien symbiote and Eddie Brock, who both had their own reasons for hating Peter Parker. Together, they knew everything about him, making him a more personal villain than most. The character was an instant hit, and over the next few years would make many more appearances in the pages of Spider-Man and even receive multiple miniseries of his own. Over the course of the 90s, however, the Venom stories would get more convoluted, with many more symbiotes appearing, and with many other characters, both male and female, replacing Eddie Brock as Venom. But at his best, Venom has at times even rivaled the Green Goblin in serving as Spider-Man's equivalent of the Joker, a dark reflection of its hero that can be used in nearly any circumstance. To date, Venom has appeared in countless comic arcs, television shows, and video games. The first attempt at making a Venom movie can be traced back as far as 1997. Then, David S. Goyer wrote a script for a Venom solo movie that was to be produced by New Line Cinema. Reportedly, Dolph Lundgren was the star as the anti-hero fighting Carnage. However, the project never made it past the development stage before it fell apart. 1 decade later, though, Venom would appear in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3. As we have covered in our Spider-Man the Cinematic Saga videos, Sam Raimi's first 2 Spider-Man movies had been huge hits for Sony, and both they and their associates at Marvel at the time wanted to ensure that the third one was as well. To this end, producer Avi Arad forced a number of mandates on Sam Raimi. Most notable among them was the inclusion of Venom. But Venom was not yet part of Spider-Man lore in those formative years of the comics Sam Raimi loved and used as his foundation for his Spider-Man movies. Raimi had absolutely no desire at all to put Venom in his movie. In the end, however, Avi Arad got his way, much to the detriment of the final movie, and to the detriment of the Venom character, portrayed by a miscast Topher Grace. Upon release, the movie was a huge hit from a financial perspective, but it was met with a mixed to negative reception, with the forced inclusion and handling of Venom being a frequent point of complaint. The mixed reception didn't faze Sony, however, as 2 months following Spider-Man 3's release, they announced a Venom spin-off movie. Their goal was to directly emulate what Fox, who were at the time developing X-Men Origins Wolverine, were doing with their X-Men series, to create a spin-off starring a popular character to keep franchise interest, while the real sequel, Spider-Man 4, was still being developed. By the end of 2009, future Deadpool writers Paul Wernick and Rhett Reese had completed their Venom script, which was said to be gritty and grounded in the vein of The Dark Knight. Gary Ross, who had directed Pleasantville and Seabiscuit, was set to direct. The role of Eddie Brock would have to be recast, as it became clear that Topher Grace would not reprise the role. The powers that be at Sony were more than fine with that, as they wanted the character moved in another direction. There was, however, widespread skepticism towards the spin-off, with even original Venom comic book artist Todd McFarlane stating, A Venom movie won't work if he is the central character. Irrespective of any skepticism, this incarnation of the Venom movie fell through when Sony decided to scrap Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4 and reboot the franchise with The Amazing Spider-Man. Following the release of Marvel's game changer, The Avengers, Sony decided to create their own Marvel Cinematic Universe centered around Spider-Man and his gallery of friends and foes, which they, not Marvel, owned the movie rights to. Since The Amazing Spider-Man had been released just 2 months after The Avengers, it was decided that The Amazing Spider-Man 2 would be the launching point, as it would not only set up The Amazing Spider-Man 3, but the Sinister Six. In addition to these, countless other Spider-Man related projects were in development, from Amy Pascal's female-centric spin-off Passion Project with director Paul Feig, to Avi Arad's passion project, Venom. In a December 13, 2013 announcement, Sony revealed plans for their own Sony Marvel Universe, including Venom. Avi Arad and Matt Tolmach would produce the films as part of a franchise brain trust, with Alex Kurtzman, Roberto Orci, and Ed Solomon set to write the screenplay for Venom, which Kurtzman would direct. Seen from the outside, one could get the impression that Avi Arad, alongside his apparent second-in-command Matt Tolmach, were the undisputed chief architects behind Sony's Spider-Verse. The emails leaked in the Sony hack, however, indicate that the real story may have been different, and that the plans that outwardly appeared to be set in stone were much more fluid behind the scenes. Avi Arad became involved with Marvel when his company, Toy Biz, seized control of the comics publisher following its 1996 bankruptcy. He oversaw and approved the licensing deals which saw Marvel lose the movie rights to its most important characters, such as Spider-Man to Sony and X-Men and Fantastic Four to Fox. After being attached as producer on all Marvel-based movies and cartoons for a decade, he left Marvel in 2006 following a public disagreement with the man who would become current Marvel Studios president, Kevin Feige, over which direction to take Marvel Studios, a disagreement where Feige came out on top. Avi Arad then set up his own production company, Arad Productions, and continued to work on producing Spider-Man movies for Sony, without Marvel's involvement beyond the contractually stated access to scripts and designs. Matt Tolmach is the former co-president of production at Sony Pictures. In that capacity, he had overseen development on Sony Spider-Man movies since day one. In 2010, he left his position as co-president by all accounts of his own free will, a move which raised some eyebrows. Tolmach then entered a production agreement which would see him actively produce Sony Spider-Man movies alongside Avi Arad. Between Avi Arad and Matt Tolmach, it would appear that behind closed doors, Sony preferred working with Tolmach. In a May 5, 2014 email correspondence between Matt Tolmach, Amy Pascal, and Doug Belgrad, they discuss how they don't think Arad is any good and that no one likes him, and how to best to communicate to him that he needs to take a step back and let Tolmach deal with most of the day-to-day business of filmmaking, and most importantly, that Arad needs to let Tolmach deal directly with talent without becoming angry or jealous or vindictive over it. On July 22nd of 2014, the announcement of The Sinister Six, The Amazing Spider-Man 3, and a film based on the popular Sony PlayStation game series Uncharted was circulated internally within Sony for approval before being released. The Sinister Six segment read, "The next film in the series will be The Sinister Six, writer-director Drew Goddard's highly anticipated villain team-up, which is the first of several planned character and story expansions. The film, which will be produced by Matt Tolmach and Avi Arad, will hit theaters on November 11th, 2016. Avi Arad took issue with this and responded, "The order for Sinister Six with Matt first and me second does not sit well with me. I think we need a further discussion. Please do not release it yet." Tolmach forwarded this to Amy Pascal and Doug Belgrad. Pascal must have been having a bad day of her own, as she told Belgrad, "Please deal with this, and I just can't deal with this too today." As it turned out, Belgrad didn't have to do much. Tolmach diffused the situation by letting Arad have his name go first. But by this time, it became clear just how badly the Arad and Tolmach produced The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was underperforming relative to expectations. For Sony, already in dire financial straits, that underperformance had huge repercussions. So much so that talking with Marvel about Spider-Man joining the MCU was actually being seriously discussed, something that had not been before. This in turn put the entire upcoming slate of both planned and semi-planned films into a state of flux. On November 17th of 2014, shortly before the Sony leaks and when talks of Spidey joining the MCU were well underway with Marvel, Avi Arad sent Amy Pascal an email where he reiterated that Venom would be one of the biggest movies Sony could ever make. and he wanted Pascal's blessing in aggressively putting the movie together. He also stressed that he was a believer in following the comic book to a T. Despite this, it would appear that even at this stage, Arad still wanted to make Venom without Spider-Man, as Amy Pascal pointed out to him that she believed Venom had to have his origin in a Spider-Man universe. Pascal also referred to previous discussions between her and Arad and repeated that Matt Tolnick is on Venom. Arad replied, "What does it mean that Matt is on it?" requesting clarification on whether he and Matt Tolnick were producing Venom or just Matt Tolnick. No clarification was given per mail. On November 24th, the Sony hack happened, and we don't have access to any emails beyond that point. No more than 3 months later, on February 9th of 2015, the Spider-Man deal was announced, which would see Spider-Man rebooted within the MCU. With the focus shifted to the Marvel production Spider-Man Homecoming, all of Sony's planned Spider-Man spin-off movies would, over the course of the next few months, quietly disappear from the release schedule. The Spider-Man deal would see Spider-Man make 5 appearances within the Marvel Cinematic Universe between 2016 and 2019. These would include Captain America's Civil War, Spider-Man Homecoming, Avengers Infinity War, the as of the making of this video, untitled Avengers Infinity War sequel, and finally, Spider-Man Far From Home. Unless the deal is extended following the release of Spider-Man Far From Home, Spider-Man will revert back to Sony and be completely off limits to Marvel Studios and the Marvel Cinematic Universe from there on out. It should, however, be in both parties' best interests to renew the deal, as it is mutually beneficial. While Sony doesn't see a dime from Spider-Man's appearances in the Avengers movies, Marvel makes the solo Spider-Man movies for Sony and they reap 100% of the proceeds from them, which was very lucrative for them on Spider-Man Homecoming. Many were therefore surprised when on March 4th of 2016, Sony announced the Venom movie, which would eventually come to be directed by Ruben Fleischer and star Tom Hardy. The surprise was not so much that a Venom movie was announced. Netflix had already expanded on their initial deal with Marvel by producing a Punisher spin-off series. Instead, the surprise laid in the fact that Venom would be made without the involvement of Marvel, set outside of the MCU, and not feature Spider-Man. That seemed off, as no other character's origin is as closely tied to Spider-Man himself as Venom. Instead of being made by, or at the very least overseen by Marvel, Venom would be produced by Sony and Sony alone, and by the very same producers that had already failed with both Spider-Man and with launching a Sony Marvel universe before, Avi Arad and Matt Tolnick. Ever since Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man became a hit beyond anyone's wildest expectations back in 2002, Sony have been extremely possessive of the franchise. When the Sony PlayStation 3 was launched back in 2006, it was even marketed with the Spider-Man font. According to the Wall Street Journal, when Kevin Feige first approached Sony chairman Amy Pascal in a lunch deal about Marvel producing Spider-Man movies for Sony so he could join the MCU, she was so offended that she reportedly threw a sandwich at him and told him to get the fuck out. Later, when Sony's precarious financial situation forced them to consider such a deal with Marvel, Sony reportedly wanted their Amazing Spider-Man movies to retroactively be made part of the MCU, so they could continue making them, but now under the MCU banner. This suggestion was flatly rejected by Feige. No one but Marvel themselves may play in the MCU sandbox. They would still be allowed to make the Spider-Man spin-offs they had planned as part of their now defunct Sony Spider-Man universe, such as Amy Pascal's female-centric passion project, even if they could not include Spider-Man or any MCU references in them. Venom is such a spin-off movie, and this is why the movie itself does not contain any references to either the MCU or Spider-Man. While the deal is in effect, Sony cannot use Spider-Man outside of the 5 movies they agreed to with Marvel, not without an addendum to the agreement. In addition to Venom, Sony have also announced more Spider-Man spin-off movies without Spider-Man, such as Silver and Black, Morbius the Vampire, and Kraven the Hunter. Like Venom, these will be made without Marvel's involvement and be set outside of the MCU, but share continuity with each other. Sony are in effect building their own cinematic universe, consisting of Spider-Man villains and supporting characters, but not Spider-Man himself. This begs the question, why? The leaked Sony emails show that there was strong opposition within Sony about entering the deal with Marvel. Many wanted Sony to keep Spider-Man to themselves and go it alone. While there are no recent hacked emails to back this up, there is speculation within the industry that Venom is Sony's first step in their future plans for Spider-Man, plans that don't necessarily involve Marvel Studios. Rumor has it that after Marvel Studios redeems Spider-Man for them, Sony may not want to extend their deal with Marvel any further when the deal expires following the release of Spider-Man Far From Home. Instead, Sony's plan is believed to be yanking Spider-Man out of the MCU and putting him into their own Sony Marvel universe that they will have set up with Venom. Spider-Man actor Tom Holland would have no other choice but to participate. He's contractually obligated to make 6 Spider-Man appearances for Sony, but the Spider-Man deal between Sony and Marvel is for only 5 movies, meaning Holland owes Sony, not Marvel, 1 more appearance as Spider-Man. If Sony decide against renewing the deal with Marvel, they can use that appearance to put the former MCU Spider-Man into their own Sony Marvel universe, thereby deceiving the majority of the movie-going audience who doesn't follow the minutia of studio politics into thinking that Venom and other future Sony Marvel movies are part of the MCU, when in fact they are not. This is something that Sony has tried before.
You are now overseeing a big comic universe too, because Sony is planning so much more with Venom, with Tom Hardy, with Silver Sable and Black Cat. How will this be all connected?
Well, those movies will all take place in the world that we are now creating for Peter Parker. I mean, there'll be adjuncts to it. They may be different locations, but it will still all be in the same world, and they will be connected to each other as well.
So there is a chance that Tom Holland as Spider-Man will pop up somewhere?
There's a chance.
There's always a chance.
The look Kevin Feige gave Pascal in that clip went viral, as she clearly said things that were not cleared with him in advance, or even remotely true. Later, in a written statement which got much less attention, Pascal clarified that Venom was not part of the MCU, and that Spider-Man would not appear in it, both of which she knew to be the case at the time of recording the video interview. Even so, in the lead up to the movie, there has been plenty of speculation among film pundits that there is an MCU connection, much of it driven by suggestive Sony comments. This being despite Marvel having been very clear that there is no connection since day one, and despite Sony, when pressed on the matter, however reluctantly and vague, having said the exact same thing. The Spider-Man deal with Marvel precludes Sony's Venom from being part of the MCU, and from Spider-Man appearing in it, at least for now. After 2019, Spider-Man will revert to Sony unless they actively renew the deal with Marvel. Does this mean Spider-Man's days in the MCU are numbered? Both Sony and Marvel are profit-driven corporations and will choose whichever course of action they believe will provide their shareholders with the most value. If Venom is successful, it will be very tempting for Sony to conclude that they have successfully started a cinematic universe of their own, and that the Marvel logo alone will bring the mass audience to whatever new movies they put out, especially if they have Spider-Man. On the other hand, if Venom underperforms, and if the foundation built by Venom is seen as too shaky to move forward with the next planned movies like Morbius the Vampire and Kraven the Hunter, then Sony may wish to extend their current deal with Marvel beyond 2019. Are you planning on seeing Sony's Venom, and knowing that it is the brainchild of the producer's previously failed Sony Cinematic Spideyverse, how excited are you for it? Let us know in the comments. If you like this video, then please click the subscribe button. And don't forget to click the bell icon to be notified for all the latest uploaded content. Due to recent changes to YouTube's monetization policies, we'd also like to ask you to please consider supporting Midnight's Edge and its sister channel Midnight's Edge After Dark through Patreon. As thanks for their support, patrons will receive early notifications of mini-documentaries, special behind-the-scenes making of the Edge videos, bloopers, outtakes, lost episodes, and more. You can support the channel for as little as $1 a month. Be sure to check back for news and analysis on the corporate politics behind your favorite genre movies, as well as updates and discussion here at Midnight's Edge.